Hello, everybody, and welcome to yet another edition of Scaleway Sessions. I am your sometimes and forever host here on the Scaleway Sessions. My name is Dan. I am the head of developer relations here at Scaleway. I am joined almost as always by Eli and today Diego behind the scenes, managing the soundboard, managing all the logistics, making sure the scrollies and the comments and everything get handled. Thank you, Diego, for your tireless work as always behind the scenes. Today, we are delighted to have as a guest a man who perhaps needs no introduction, so I won't. Instead, I'll let him do it. Kerim, would you like to say hello to the audience?
Yes, hello everyone. First of all, Diego, thank you for handling all the behind the scenes work. That's the real hard job. You're just making us look good. Your payment is in the mail. You got this. Hey folks, my name is Kerim Satirli. I'm a senior developer advocate at HashiCorp, where I focus on Terraform, Nomad, and other fun projects.
That's it. All right, thank you everybody for this great edition of the Scaleway
Sessions.
Really appreciate it.
Love it.
No, wait, hold on. There's more. So full disclosure, Kerim and I, this is not the first time we've been on camera together. Not the first time we've been on stream together. We have had the pleasure and the honor of working together in the past on a number of projects, actually over the years, which has been really cool. Some work and professional stuff in the world of tooling and what have you, and then also on the now sadly defunct DevOps party games, which was a lot of fun. Eli, I think, also appeared on DevOps party games.
Yeah, I mean that's where I first became aware of you, and eventually, I guess that's why I'm now here at Scaleway. So
wow, you make these connections, right? All you have to do is have a few drinks, draw a few silly pictures, and all of a sudden you've got a job.
Make a few jobs about Bitcoin. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. More than a few, if I recall correctly. All right.
Kind of how architecture goes, right?
It is. That's how that works, right? So what is going on today? For all you cool cats joining us for the first time, the way this works is very, very simple. We get the group of us together. We like to have a guest come on, and that guest is generally a specialist, well-respected in their field, subject matter expert, someone who really, really knows what they're talking about, and then we proceed to ask that person ridiculous questions and kind of just go from there, right? For those of you who are joining us as repeat offenders, we really, really appreciate your patronage. Smash the like and subscribe button. Really, really do appreciate that. As always, thank you for your comments. Thank you for interacting with us on Twitter. Thank you for sending us your questions. Thank you for hitting me up, sliding into my DMs on the 1,000,001 Slacks that I'm on for ideas for future and upcoming shows, guests we should have. That really helps us to put together a program that's interesting and compelling for you. So don't stop, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Definitely, reach out to us and let us know what you want to see next, because that's what we're doing, right? So on today's edition, we are going to be leaning fairly heavily into the subject matter expert and the subject matter expertise of Kerim as a representative of HashiCorp, of course, someone who knows one or two things about infrastructure management, one or two things about managing and deploying and life cycles, and also just back-end systems and how data is stored and how do you move it around in a distributed capacity. So if you have questions about this, it's a big topic, this platform topic, what does something look like as code, so on and so forth, feel free to hit us up in the chat. Feel free to send us messages on Slack, whatever works for you. If you're watching us on YouTube, use the YouTube chat. We get it piped in here, so please don't hesitate. All right.
Exciting.
It is. It's very exciting. So right on. So I'm going to kick us off with a softball. Are you ready for the softball? That's a baseball reference. I'm led to understand. So. I've never played the sport. I'm going to kick it off with a softball, which is when hopefully we all have heard of infrastructure as code. I don't think we're going to dive into a primer on that. What is happening now that's exciting in the world of IAC? IAC is a thing. It's been a thing for a long time. It's great. But what is happening now that's actually really interesting and compelling?
I think the biggest thing I keep seeing is people focus more on supply chain security. Infrastructure as code is obviously an engineering practice, but for the longest time we haven't treated it as such. We didn't fully version our infrastructure. It was ClickOps for a long time. Then we finally got it codified. Now we're actually looking at, hey, this API that we're talking to, with this binary, how do we ensure that that binary is not tampered with? You want to set up your monitoring, you probably have systems that help you figure out if your stuff is broken. That's critical. If an attacker can get between you and your API calls, maybe you're not getting the right alerts. Maybe you're actually in breach of, an SLA with a customer. And that's just the smallest example. Supply chain security will help you prevent stuff like that, and it's been exciting to see that. Strong focus on that. Strong focus on security in general, not just from an engineering perspective. Authentication, authorization is finally getting its moment in the light. I'm sure it's going to pass quick, fast, because, security is a team sport, but nobody ever wants to play on that team.
Harsh. Right, everybody's getting picked at the schoolyard, right? Yeah, I pick Valence, I pick Florence, and all of a sudden there's security over in the background, like, hi guys.
It's like, sorry, our team is full. Yeah.
Well, I was that kid at school, and I've now grown up into someone who's quite interested in security. So there's some truth.
Perhaps not a coincidence.
I'm glad it's happening. That focus is important. Obviously we see it come back in waves ever so often, but every new generation of infrastructure tooling needs a new approach to it, despite solving similar-ish problems as before.
Excellent. So I am just tweeting about this. So to mention to everybody that we are live with you on Scaleway Sessions. The next big thing in IAC is supply chain security. So send your question to us. Join us live to learn more. I'm going to send tweet now. So what's happening, right, is supply chain security and security in general, right? So supply chain security, that's one thing, right? So when we talk about supply chain security, the word supply chain, of course, coming from the world of manufacturing, right? So if we're trying to build a car, where are we getting screws from, right?
Where we're getting screws from that actually meet the engineering criteria we need. I think that's the most important part.
Okay, great. So expand on that. We talk about supply chain in the world of deploying virtual infrastructure. What does that mean?
Couple of things. So the API part is obviously one huge one. I, as a consumer, have a contract with a provider to say I want to spin up a couple of virtual machines. I want to make sure when I talk to an API and tell it what I need, usually I'll do that through Terraform, no surprise there. I have an agreement, and with that agreement, I can make sure that I can get the infrastructure I need. I'm going to need some networking components. I'm going to need, obviously, application runners, persistent storage. All these options are one part of what we're delivering. If we're going back to the car metaphor, we basically have the agreement that we're delivering a car with 2 doors, obviously because it's a fast car, no roof because, waste not, and the weather has been great lately, so we're skipping on that. And for all of that to fit together, the collapsible roof has to have very certain engineering measurements or general measurements, but adhere to certain engineering standards to make sure that when we deploy our roof, it actually works. I think from that perspective, that focus in infrastructure as code is beautiful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. So the idea that we can have the car, right? So we have this idea, it has wheels. It has a way to control it, possibly another different sort of wheel, right? It has lights and so on and so forth. And these things, and if we're going to torture this car metaphor further, because in for a penny, if you're a major auto manufacturer, chances are you're actually trying to reuse a lot of stuff, right? So if you can build one frame for more than one car, you're on the right track. If you can put lights and widgets and gadgets and screws and mechanisms into more than one style of car, you're doing it right. And I imagine it's actually not dissimilar in the world of infrastructure as code, right? This idea of reusable tools, reusable modules. Again, that's not new. So within the context of supply chain security, are then we talking about, okay, where are we getting these parts from? Are they reliable? Can we make statements about their fitness for purpose? Can we make statements about guaranteeing whether they're going to be free of bugs? I mean, what does that mean?
I think part of that comes down to being very clear what we want. If you go to any conferences these days, the joke is, of course, ChatGPT is going to replace us. And then the follow-up to that is it's not going to happen until we know how to actually write proper specs. And that's the thing.
So it will never replace us. Okay, good. We're good.
I saw a great story the other day about a lawyer who'd used ChatGPT to write his original brief and then doubled down and it had given fake cases. It had cited fake cases and it had just snowballed. And this lawyer's probably going to get disbarred. Incredible. Just incredible.
Probably for good reason, because if you don't know your source material, you just deployed something with a shady provider and your infrastructure is tainted now.
Yeah,
So-
that's exactly it, right? I really, and it's only a matter of time until we're asking ChatGPT to build our Terraform modules for us. It's only a matter of time if someone isn't
I would
already
love
doing
that.
it, right?
I would love
But in
that.
order
I
to
don't
do
want
that,
to focus on that.
In order to do that, you have to know what it is you want. And that's the hard part.
That's the hard part, right? Let's take your Apple Silicon service, right? If you're going to be building some Apple Watch apps, you're going to need the right building hardware. Deploying the server on its own, super easy. You specify a size or a type, you specify a name, great. That's not the module we're looking at, right? We want to make sure the right software is on there. We want to make sure the right connectivity is there. Can my build pipeline connect to that reliably? And more importantly, once all the building is done, we've assembled a car and we're about to slap that final sticker on there that says this car is fit for use, we get to signing. So we have private keys for signing. How do we know that machine that I created, at the beginning of the session, in an hour, that ran all of our builds, is actually the right machine? What kind of policies do we need to make sure that what we got in the beginning is still the same thing we're talking with at the end? And that's a hard part to figure out.
So I like that. How do I know that the thing I built is the thing I expected to build? Right? Like we have this idea, and I'll admit I fall into this trap as well, right? Where I'm just like, oh, whatever, I'll just write a Docker file, right? I mean, it's basically just bash, right? So here we go. I'll just do this and I'll just do that and I'll run this command and I'll do this and then I'll just pull this completely unsigned image from someplace I found lying around on the internet and then, right? Like, wait, hold on. There's a step there that's actually probably pretty important, right? So there's been, I don't want to dive into the whole where do we get our images from and how do we guarantee the security of those images, stuff like that, because like that's a really, really big topic. But is that part of when we talk about supply chain security and IAC is, sourcing pre-built artifacts part of that discussion?
It should be. Security, I like to make this remark that security is a team sport, but it's also a team sport because it's multifaceted. If we're talking the Docker images that you referenced, a lot of us just say, from Nginx and then add in your own stuff, you're good, right? It works. It works on my machine. It will work on your machine. Will it work in the eyes of your security team? No, this is not functional code that is actually fully ready. Because what you're getting is whatever the latest version of that Nginx image is. So we need content addresses. We need to be more specific in telling a registry, this is the image I want based on this very specific address. 32 characters, which will ensure that you and I, when we download the image, are getting the exact same binary. And then if we have a way of storing the keys, the signing keys, and the checksums, then we can actually pre-verify that before we pull it in, before we load untrustworthy code onto our system, that this is the stuff that we should be downloading. So it is definitely part of it. It is a hard part to figure out. There's a lot of tooling around it, but it's hard because it makes everything a lot more cumbersome. So you almost need translation layers. GitHub Actions has the same problem. If you think about it, when it came out, a couple of lines of code you add to your repository and you pull in an action with a version string, something like v1. That's great, super nice. It doesn't matter if it's v101, 1.95, or 1.200. It's just gonna work.
Oh, it's the Kubernetes.
Yep.
Naming. Yeah, I got you. Yeah.
Except, which one of those is the right one? And when you talk to your CISO, how do you make sure that your pipeline doesn't break? Well, we're using V1. It's going to be good, right? Like, nobody's going to delete that tag or change it in nefarious ways. Content addresses, huge part. If we're talking infrastructure as code, pretty much all the tools in that space give you access to similar approaches. Terraform has a log file where it keeps track of provider checksums. And what's nice there, by default, you get the ones for your system. But, Eli and I were talking about it before. My standard machine is a Mac. Eli's standard machine is Ubuntu. So we would have different checksums because we have different binaries. In Terraform, I like to just put in all the checksums for all the systems that my team works on, because ultimately those 2 kilobytes of text data extra are not going to cause any trouble. But missing that stuff and not knowing which binaries you're running, that's the hard part.
100%. And when you talk about checksums, we can get into an arcane discussion about checksum collisions and how do we actually generate that? Is it MD5? What do we do? Oh, it's RUT13. Okay, fine. But
I love that stuff.
Yeah, we can, and probably at some point will get into a discussion of that arcana. But checksum validation, on the one hand, it's bread and butter stuff. It's table stakes. And on the other hand, the number of organizations actually doing it in anything approaching a rigorous manner is vanishingly small, in my experience.
It's not fun. It's troublesome. It's a lot of work. It removes the fun of just saying V1, get me the latest version, because your content address does not humanly translate to something that you can immediately recognize. And so, our code that actually got very clear to look at now is less clear.
It's not very move fast and break things. And so there's exactly, which is, and I'm not saying that move fast break things is a good mentality. But it's, exactly as Kerim says, like, it's not an exciting area to be working on as a part of developer experience or anything. So, maybe that's what we should do. We should spin off a company and work on making the developer experience of checksums and content addresses more bearable.
Developer experience is hard. Developer experience is really hard, especially for things like this. A couple of weeks ago, I started working on some code around this because of GitHub Actions not having proper pinning, or having proper pinning but not exposing it. So I was like, you know what? I'll write some Terraform code. TLDR, I was able to do it. But when I looked at my code, I was like, yeah, this works, but this is not a place of honor.
No great deeds are commemorated here.
Exactly. We needed these values to come from the API, and we needed them in this way. But this does not fall in the category of best practices, and I wrote this. I'm not going to ever look at this again because I feel ashamed. It works. It provides security. So that's definitely important. But the fact that, we're talking about 10 lines of code and about 50 lines of documentation surrounding that code, explaining why those choices were the right way or were made that way, that's a hard part.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's that tension between, and I've seen this as part of like learning about user authentication and things like that, where sometimes usability and security really are in tension. Passwords would be much more secure if we could all remember arbitrary numbers of 32 character strings, right? But we can't. That's not usable. And yeah, it's the same thing here.
It's very much the same thing. I'm also very excited that you immediately recognized the quote I started.
Oh, yeah.
I appreciate that.
We're all nerds here. You're among friends.
This is very true.
Somebody brought that up in the comments of a conference talk I did last week, actually, and I was delighted.
Well, and speaking of code comments, one of the things that has really treated me well over the years when trying to develop my programming skills and trying to be a better engineer. Certainly when that was the focus of my job. I'm a humble manager now and don't code as much as I used to, but it is diving into other people's code, right? Like spelunking in other people's code, good, bad, weird, right? Learning to read code is a real skill. And having comments that explain what the code is doing is, obviously extremely helpful. No one can debate this, and if you choose to debate this, you're wrong. So having good code comments is important, but there's some subtleties in the word good there. The word good there is doing a lot of heavy lifting, right? Because what does that even mean? And when you put something like warning, what I'm doing here should not be done, is extremely useful, right? Don't shy away from that. Warn people that they're about to step into a hornet's nest, as opposed to just being like, oh, I guess the hornet's nest is good and true. Right?
I guess this is just what writing Terraform code looks like, except
right?
it's not.
I guess we just hard code passwords and commit them to GitHub. I guess that's what we do, right? Right?
I mean, we pay for secret scanning, right? Like, why pay for a feature you're not going to use?
Yeah, exactly, right. But that's really handy. I remember this is a couple years back now. I was trying to learn a little bit more about datetime libraries, which, by the way, if you have ever wanted a way to go as mad as fast as possible, it's to examine datetime libraries. I've never been the same since. But I was looking through the standard, like, the stdlib for datetime in Python. And there's, for every 1 or 2 lines of code, there's about a page of comments explaining it, because they're like, what you're about to see, you're going to look at that and go, I think I can do better than that.
You can't.
I want to assure you that you don't know what you're talking about. And this is why, right? And then boom, 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 And because, there was somebody somewhere who was like, oh yeah, I can do better than that. And like, proposed a patch, and then Guido had to come and like,
yeah,
but that's extremely helpful. And the best part about that is even in, and I have to admit, I have not looked in probably about 2 years, so maybe it's changed now. But as of 2 years ago, there's a section of comments sitting in Python 3 datetime library that basically amounts to, we don't know why this works.
You love to see that.
Touch it.
Don't breathe on it. Don't look at it for too long.
Probably no daylight, preferably.
Yeah, exactly. You've got to. You don't want to wear cotton gloves. You just want to have clean hands when touching this, like proper archival experts. You
don't want any of the fibers.
Yeah,
only open the file in read-only mode, because maybe your line endings are going to change and mess something up.
Oh, you auto ran black over it, and now it doesn't work anymore. Yeah.
Yes, it's like the observability principle, right? You observed it, and now it's different. You shouldn't have even looked at it.
Don't do that. Don't acknowledge it. Don't speak its name.
Don't look at it directly.
Don't even reference it in the commit message. It is very much that.
Yeah. What were we talking about? Oh yeah, infrastructure as code.
I mean, that was going back to the broader topic we're talking about. That was going to be one of my questions, and it's as usual with me, it's a people question. Is infrastructure has all of this context and decision making, often business decisions baked into it. When you're doing infrastructure as code, what's the best way, in your opinion, Kerim, to encode and make known that context? Is it like external documentation? Is it inline comments? Is it?
For me, it's a little bit of both. It's a little bit of many things, really. On a code level, if we're talking Terraform, we're talking resources. Every resource, I have a direct link to the documentation page for that specific resource, because usually when I look at it, that's what I'm going to be looking at, because
what
upstream.
Is this? Yeah.
Exactly, right? Apple Silicon Virtual Machine is not something I use on a daily basis, so I'm going to need a little refresher every time I look at it. And once I've figured out what all the options are, then maybe I don't need the link, but the next person might. Then, if we're setting, let's keep the virtual machine. We might be setting M1 despite M2 being available. Why are we setting M1? Well, because for this app, for this customer, we're only building on M1 because their agreement is not to also have M2 support. Sorry, but that's how the contract works. From an engineering perspective, switching M1 to M2, super easy. From a contractual perspective, maybe there's a reason. I'm not saying you should have that deep in the code, but that would be a business level decision that you could actually codify. Then, of course, especially in the Terraform ecosystem, there's a tool called Terraform Docs, which is amazing. Pointed at a directory, it just gives you a full README with everything in there. These are the versions that you need for your Datadog provider, for your Kubernetes provider, whatever you have, and it works. Then it describes all the variables for you. So if you went through the trouble of giving your variables good names and good descriptions, that's now becoming a README that anyone can read without having to understand the Terraform code. That's already huge. Your first onboarding experience going to this repository is going to be a long README explaining default values. We're talking Boolean, strings, lists, whatever. Is there something that is required? Where are you sourcing this from? And so on and so forth. I think that makes onboarding, once you're on the repository level, pretty sweet. That being said, we're just talking about the known knowns. The unknowns are the things that, Dan and I will be working on this. In 3 months down the road, we write that code that needs the long-term nuclear waste storage message. If we don't codify that as well in the README and put that in the code, all of that auto-generated stuff is not going to mean anything because we're going to be wondering, we might not wonder, we'll be ashamed, but you might come in and wonder, why is this here? Should I change this? So it's really a lot. It's on the code level. It's on the README level. It's how do you teach people that this is the reason, this is the way it's done, and the reason for it is because it works. So those things, I think, are the three that I look at mostly.
That's fair. So thinking about quote-unquote self-documenting code, auto-documenting code, so on and so forth, again, can of worms, as a friend of mine says, it's a can of Pandora. And again, flame war commence, fine, right? But at the end of the day, I think it's not controversial to say that if you have something, if you have code and you have documentation and the two things line up, that is probably better than having no documentation, right? Or I guess worse is actually having documentation that doesn't line up with the code. That is in fact worse, but
Exactly.
nonetheless. But if you're putting code comments, right into where you go, we'll take Python as the example because I happen to have an IDE open over here on the other side of my screen, and you're doing like PyDoc or something like that, where you add, a little bit of, rub some @ symbols on there, it'll be fine.
Yep.
Right? And then using that to just generate a cool little website, which you can then serve with Sphinx or whatever.
Yep.
Right?
I love that.
It's okay. You don't need to be a documentation expert. You don't need to, have a perfectly artisanally crafted readme.md with build badges and stuff in it, right? Like, just stick with what you already know. You already know your IDE. You already know your code. You already know how to add decorators. Don't do anything different. Just do those things. And then when you're running your tests, just add a little step there, which is make a markdown file.
Exactly.
Right? Boom.
It's beautiful. It's welcoming. It's nice for new people joining the project. And the way I think about it, if you don't like the documentation I'm writing, PR's welcome. Help me figure this out, because I only put in the stuff that I know I need, because I've worked on this project. I know why that message is in there. You might come in and wonder, but why are you specifying, the data structure in this format? Leave some comments. Help me figure this out. Put some notes in the README that, help us, especially with a couple of nice decorators, to get better code documentation. Code is hard because code without documentation is, a foreign language. And most people that might be looking at your code might not be first language speakers. Yet most code documentation is usually in English. And that's where things get trickier, because there's this mental barrier. I grew up in Austria. English was not my first language, despite my first word being English. So when I started writing things in English, texts and school stuff, and then switched to technical writing, it was like, this is a different approach. This is way different than all the language skills you're taught. It's a hard barrier to get over. But get over it and appreciate that other people will have to cross that same barrier. Nobody's going to go out and point out that you made a typo. If they do, GitHub has a beautiful ban button. These are not the people you need on your repository.
Okay, so hold on. Two things there that I want to extract from that. Thing number one is I'd love to get a conversation going on. How do we get people to cross that barrier? So get over it. Okay, that's fine to make that statement, but how can we set people up for success there? What can we do as open source maintainers? What can we do as people managers? What can we do as developer relations people who would like, what can we do to help people get over that hump? That's item number one. And then item number two we could dive into is, okay, so what do you do? What do you do if the complainer is in the audience, right? But we'll put that one aside for now. Stay positive.
The complainers are not really worth talking about. Let's figure out, how to get more people into this community.
Right.
So one thing that I really love about working with some of my colleagues is that we have very dedicated people. And so 2 years ago, we did an online event called HashiTalks Build, where we focused on talking about how do you build for HashiCorp tooling. It was super cool, super nerdy, and so I asked my friend who back then ran technical writing workshops internally, hey, could you give that technical writing workshop to people that sign up? And so we had, I think, 10, 15 people show up. They got 1-on-3 training from our education engineers, I think that's a terminology, in how to write better documentation, how to write better guides, being descriptive without being verbose, pointing out the right things, and figuring out a language that works in terms of how do I highlight that this is important and this is, it's not unimportant, but it's not as critical as the other parts. I think more companies should do that. We haven't repeated it since, so there's also some homework for me, but having those workshops, I think, is a crucial thing. The Write the Docs initiative, 2 conferences a year, meetup groups, at least in parts of Europe and the US, where you get technical writers together. As with any meetup, find the time to go there, and other than getting free pizza, you might also get some knowledge.
And then as Dan mentioned, as people managers, make it easy and frictionless for somebody on your team who wants to go and do that, sort of sponsor them to do it, sort of, I guess.
Exactly. People think of code contributions as only being valid if it's actual code. And that's the wrongest approach ever. If you find a typo in documentation, that means somebody else is going to run into that or has already run into it and probably been frustrated by it. If you see a typo, fix the typo. It is a valid code contribution. It is the best code contribution.
I have a friend who has a conference talk called Intentional Code Design. The friend's name is David Whitney. And one of the things that he says in that I love is code is literature, like that humans are trying to talk to each other, but we've constrained ourselves to this language that's interpretable by machines as instructions. And comments are our little escape hatch out of that. It's where we can talk more freely without being constrained by the machine having to interpret it. And we should, we should, and I think a lot of people do very well at making use of that. It's where you have space to explain why you're doing a thing.
I think the context is so incredibly important. I mean, decorators are good, but we know that decorators are ultimately parsed, and decorators are not super comfortable to write 3 paragraphs of reasoning of why this is the way it is. Mm-hmm. And your code, the symbiosis between you and your code. It's like any relationship. You need to be talking to each other in order to get better at it, and not just talking to it and telling it what to do, but also listening to what your code responds with. If your functions fail a lot when you give it the wrong inputs, maybe put a comment in there. Hey, my code is very fragile. It doesn't like to be treated this way. If the schema does not validate, we're going to have some troubles. I'm phrasing this intentionally in a way that Dan can turn it into a one-liner.
Yes, I am live tweeting, by the way, which is why I'm often looking this way as everyone's talking. So thank you. I appreciate that.
Catching up on the hot Twitter gossip.
Yeah, exactly.
I think ultimately, when we don't document our code, we leave things up for interpretation. And I think the best example of things being left up to interpretation is what was it, the Mars Climate Orbiter smashing into the space probe, smashing into a rock because one team used metric and the other. Yep.
So yeah, it was the unit, of course, was entering orbit, and the idea was that once it reached a certain point in altitude, it was going to deploy a parachute. But the problem is that one of the teams working on this was working in metric, and another one of the teams working on it was working in imperial, and those are not the same. And so instead of deploying the parachute and gently floating to the surface of Mars, it just smashed into Mars.
Yep. Another space example is something that's been on my mind because I just did this talk about data storage. And the 1976 Viking Mars lander went to Mars, stored a lot of data on magnetic tapes, got all that data back. But the team didn't write down the encodings used, like how to interpret these tapes, essentially. And NASA left them in a cupboard for 10 years. And when they came back to them, all of that original team had either died or left NASA. And a new team had to go back to the actual original lander and look at the mechanical components to determine what the encoding was. And they did eventually redecipher it. But if there had been some comments left around, maybe they could have saved themselves some work. But digital dark age stuff, basically.
Well, kudos to the engineers.
Right.
Honestly, credit where credit is due. That is phenomenal. Mm-hmm. But imagine what they could have done if they weren't doing that.
Right?
Right? Exactly.
Yeah. It's not like the linguists in the 1800s who reconstructed like Akkadian. They had nothing better to be doing. NASA engineers, on the other hand.
Yeah. It's
I was too enraptured by your story to write a pithy quote on Twitter because I
just say Eli weird NASA facts.
Eli, yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Also, Eli with the weird NASA facts. Excellent.
Mm-hmm.
The only upside of that probe smashing into the surface was, of course, that the parachute did deploy, sadly, too late, and only because the box exploded. But as far as the unit test goes, the parachute deployed.
Yeah, fair.
Yeah, it was bad test writing, I think.
Yeah, I mean, that's just it. And we're talking, okay, let's talk about testing. Fine. The door has been opened. Let us walk through it. Right? So testing is great. Everybody should be testing. There's a lot of different ways to test. I don't care how you do it. You should be at least doing some of it sometimes. Right? Now, there's some great conferences out there that you want to go and you can learn about testing that are literally just about QA, literally just about how you do this. Someone's going to try to tell you that TDD is the truth, the light, and the way. It's fine. It's okay. Right?
Obviously, it's BDD.
It's okay. But the point
you
is
TDD, BDD. You can define your behaviors up front.
So what? But wait, what if we have to define the behaviors of the tests that will in turn test the behavior harness that we used to build the tests?
Now you're thinking with BDD. Yeah.
Exactly. If we come back to this idea of alleged infrastructure, right? And for those of you who are curious, it actually shout out to Rob on the Platform at Scale Slack who asked me, why is it called infrastructure allegedly? It's a weird name for a talk, for a sessions. So one, it's a reference to a Canadian television show that Kerim and I are both obsessed with, so fine. But also, it's it's a way of sort of expressing this idea that like when we're deploying things, when we're doing our jobs, right, we like to think we're doing it correctly. We like to think that we know how to do our jobs. We like to think that we're good at our jobs, right? But a lot of what we do, and I'm going to say the quiet part out loud, is hoping that it doesn't break.
Yes.
We draw
Right?
all our little schematics, and then we kind of just send them out into the world and hope that when they materialize into the objects that function as we want. But
I like that.
yeah, and we can get really, really good at drawing those schematics and understanding how they translate into the real world. But until you actually get your hands on the finished thing, you know, yeah, it's all theoretical.
It is. So then let's wrap these two things together, right? If we are attempting to do our jobs and we want to go a little bit further than hopes and prayers, right? Are there ways to test? And I don't mean 100% end to end, this is going to be the thing and it will never break. But is there any way that we could be rubbing a little bit of reliability onto our IAC before we actually burn the company down?
Well, first of all, if you go to any DevOps conference, you know there's about 15 vendors that will sell you that exact problem solution for about 49 per instance per month. So yes, there is a way of doing this. And don't worry, it's not going to break the company. We'll get you set up with a special plan. That being said, I think Roman infrastructure engineers solved this like 1700 years ago. Defense in depth. We have to keep shifting all the stuff. Actually, it should be called defense to the left, because we're shifting stuff to the left all the time. Let's talk about security, real brief, software security. If we're looking at something like Salsa, Salsa has security levels. Level 4, super great. You have a hardened build platform. You're looking at making sure that tamper-proof builds, coming back to that Apple Watch app that we're building, nobody can get in there. So, we have a setup that we can probably use for medical hardware, medical software. It's great. The thing we're still not looking at is when we initially build our build platform, how do we make sure everything there is perfect and trustworthy? And perfect in the sense of, are we hitting all the auditable items that we need to hit? Are we able to ensure that nothing at all is on that system that shouldn't be on there? So if you look at the 4 Salsa levels, it's almost level -1, like you're going to the cellar instead of the fancy offices that get, harder to get to, but still are very important. And then as we keep shifting these things to the left, we have this promise, with infrastructure as code, we express what we want. I want this build server. You run your tool at it, and exit 0, cool, this works. Hey, my server is running. Now we're going to throw some policy verification at it. So this machine has started. Are we actually running this in the right region? If we're serving, European customers, building the app, not a problem if that doesn't happen in Europe. Storing the app's data, definitely a problem if that is not happening in Europe. So if that server that identifies itself as, api.mydomain.com is actually, or the load balancer for that is actually not based in Europe, that's a problem. Our policy should catch that if our infrastructure as code didn't catch that, and if our engineers didn't catch that. So we have several checks that all have to pass to make this more sensible. And this is endless. We could be talking about this for many more hours and identify literally every single attribute. It's almost job security.
Almost.
The more you look at it, the more points you find that you have to validate and that you should want to validate to make sure things work. And of course, there's going to be that point where you're going to say, you know what, enough is enough. At one point, we have to trust that some things are good.
It's certificate authorities. At some point, there has to be one that you just trust, and that's what it rests on. Yeah.
Well, there was back when Let's Encrypt was first a thing. Everybody's not saying we're going to do Let's Encrypt. It's this sort of first step into the foray, and there was some press releases and a website got set up and like a board was named, and people had to be vetted. There were background checks. There were various legal things had to occur. Statements made in front of a barrister, so on and so forth. And then they literally constructed a physical vault, and there was an actual key generation ceremony with neutral third-party observers, and it was recorded, and so on and so forth. And I had people, including myself at the time, who were looking at this going, what is all this nonsense, right? Like, whatever, just, I don't know, generate your checksum and put it in a file. What is all this pomp and circumstance for, right? But then when you walk that all the way back, it's exactly what you're saying, Eli, which is that at some point you have to trust something, right? And in the case of Let's Encrypt, whose mission was to put at that time SSL, and now we don't say that anymore. Of course, we right, we say TLS, but at that time, right, everywhere. And so if their mission was to put HTTPS in front of every single URL on the internet, maybe a little bit of pomp and circumstance, and a little bit of like, oh, we actually videoed people putting this paper copy of the key into this vault, and the vault is sealed now, is a good thing.
I mean,
Allegedly.
Allegedly. It doesn't necessarily mean anything technically, but then humans aren't technical creatures. We do run on quite a lot of emotion and sort of vibes. And if you are going to feel more comfortable about your HTTPS meaning something, if you've seen a big fancy video of somebody in a fancy outfit doing something about it, that's worth doing.
Speaking of big fancy outfits, we need more of those, right? Like, where are, seriously, where are the
is in fact the 2nd of June today, which means it's Pride Month.
It is Pride Month.
Can't believe I wasn't wearing these the whole time.
Oh my god,
I love this.
Slacking off.
Yep.
I'm gonna go with multicolored here.
Yeah, no, I see it.
Yeah. Very good. I don't know what I was thinking. God, drop the ball. Sorry, everybody.
You're just a red flag.
The only reason I have these to hand is because I just got back from conferencing and holiday, and my room is an absolute tip. So.
I got Rob on I see you, Rob, on Platform at Scale. He wants to know where the wig is. Yes. Okay. So for those of you who watched the Eurovision hack party, the pink wig was a smash hit. No, I am not going to be wearing it all the time. It is special. If you do something all the time, it's not special anymore, Robert. Okay.
Like using someone's full name. You only bring that out in circumstances.
Exactly. I'm sorry, Robert. But yeah, he's messaging me now. Anyway, point is, what were we talking about? Testing. It's hard, very essential. We got to do this.
Yeah,
okay,
and there
super.
comes a point where there are certain things you just have to trust.
You just have to trust. Exactly.
The thing that put me in mind of is with user authentication, again, like account recovery is hard because if you don't, or verifying that you are who you are to start with, because once you have methods of authentication set up and you've got a hardware token, whatever, it's easy for those to continue working. But setting them up in the first place and establishing that trust is actually, it's difficult. It's one of the most technically difficult things about the whole situation. And that's going to be true of wherever you start building infrastructure. What do you make your bedrock? And
a lot of
the
trust is established on first use. And that means, the first time I'm pulling in a binary, I don't have anything that identifies this as good.
Yeah, what if that's dodgy?
Exactly. We have to have the trust somewhere. I think what you said, ceremonies that help us rule out most common problems are good enough. And the way I like to think about it, a friend of mine who's been a security engineer for a company for the past 25 years told me their approach is security is hard. You can never cover 100%. But if our building and our software is just a little bit harder to get into than our neighbors, then that's good enough.
I like that.
And the company, because obviously
security
that might
is
not
hard, and it will never be 100%.
But you don't need to run faster than the bear, just faster than the person next to you.
Well, okay. Yeah.
Or more securely.
So,
Yeah.
but perhaps a way that's less gruesome of thinking about that is that even though you like accept the fact that security will never be 100%, like accept that. And I feel like once you internalize that, it actually makes a lot of other things a little bit easier to reason about, right? Like if you go, okay, the security is 100%, we don't need to worry about it, that's a trap.
Mm.
Right, it's a trap because then you won't put layers between things, right? You won't start working about, you
Exactly.
won't start thinking about MTLS. You won't start thinking about like what happens if this node over here is compromised and it's internal. You won't start thinking about what about key rotation, right? So
Once
as
you
soon as
go,
you,
I have this limited amount of energy, you can start reasoning about where to spend it.
yes, exactly. So accept that it will never be 100%. Like really internalize that it is an ongoing journey and something new every single day is going to get discovered, and that is actually good. It doesn't mean that you're doing your job poorly. It doesn't mean that you're insecure and scary, shut everything down. It means everybody is doing their jobs, and your job is to find those things and fix them.
I think that's something that's hard for a lot of engineers to accept and internalize, because a lot of us are the kind of type A in terms of our sort of academic or success, like career success type thing. Like we want to check every box. We want to be, accepting that you are going to fail if you consider like my software not being 100 secure a failure. That's really hard. That's something I'm still learning as a fully grown adult, right? And to sort of, I think accepting that technically involves accepting a little bit of that on a deeper level, and that's difficult.
For a lot of us, I think the only acceptable completion percentage is a 3-digit one.
Yeah.
And with games, that's totally fine. But with code, that's so hard to hit, because even when you hit the 100%, you have 100% of what your test harness thinks is 100%.
I know one repository on GitHub that is perfect and has no bugs and no failing tests and no vulnerabilities, and it is Kelsey Hightower's no-code repository. Yeah.
Shout out Kelsey Hightower.
Yeah.
Oh, a hero to us all. No code is the best code.
Factual.
Facts. Right?
You can't be wrong.
But the issue with no code is that it is open to interpretation, right? So how, thought experiment time, and this is the last thing we'll do before we wrap up and we'll get our shout outs. So we'll do a little thought experiment. What does good documentation for no code look like?
Good documentation for me, for no code, looks like documentation that explains why there is no code. Once I have that in there, there is no more reasoning needed, because then we'll know why it's there. The author has shared their vision with the reader. And the author obviously has very decent knowledge of all the code that wasn't used, which I think is important. The code that's not there is as important as the code that is there. In this case, there's no code there, but you know what I'm saying. Eli, what do you think?
Well, you've given the very serious and nuanced and thoughtful answer that people should actually listen to. I was just thinking about, I don't know, you just include the complete works of Foucault or something. This is a piece of art that transcends the limitations of the form or something. I don't know. It's some philosophy about the concept of nothingness or something like that.
I think if that helps understand why the code was written the way it was written, there's nothing wrong with that. We talked about business logic before. We talked about how do we make sure we hit that translation in a proper way. I think, imagine your code is written based on certain prose, certain literature. It is totally fine to have that in there.
So we got a comment from, this from Megan. Hi, I heard from someone about code testing that if you reach the 100% coverage, it means you haven't created the right tests yet. Yeah.
Confirm.
Can confirm. Exactly. So, and this is where you get to sort of the rabbit hole of things. And we fell into this rabbit hole. This is some years ago, so I'll pull out a Mozilla story. And we, spoiler alert, had a bunch of code and no tests. Wow, what a weird story. And
Certainly
so
company like that before or anything
Yeah,
like
weird.
that. Yeah.
And so we thought it would be great. We're gonna just spend a quarter. We're gonna dedicate some sprints, and we're gonna do tests. And so we started to write tests. And when you start to write tests on legacy code, you find bugs. You find them all over the place, and then you start to go, oh well, hold on. Do we keep writing tests, or do we stop and fix the bugs? And then
that's
you go,
where you do test-driven development. You
and
write the
then you
correct
go,
tests,
okay,
and then you make them pass.
some of these bugs are actually really bad, so we're going to triage those ones and we're going to fix those ones. And so you go ahead and you fix those ones. You go, they're fixed now, and then you scurry along and keep writing more tests, except you didn't update the tests for the code you just fixed, and there are new bugs. Right? So it's just a cycle that goes on forever.
And that's called
right?
software development.
And it's called that's called being a professional software developer.
Yep.
The professional part only refers to the fact that you're getting paid for it, not that you're
not that you're any good at it. Yeah, exactly. So thank you for that extremely insightful comment. Really appreciate it. All right, we got a few minutes left. I want to be respectful of everybody's time, which is something I learned in mandatory manager training. So what I'd like to do is suggest
360s.
Yeah. Okay. Oh, those are. We could do a whole thing on 360s. But what I'd like to do is just, if we've got anything, we'd like to do some shout outs. We always like to do some shout outs. Kerim, you've got a thing coming up.
We've got a thing coming up. We've got Hashi Days happening in European time zones. June 13th, London, Paris, Munich. I'll be in Munich, so definitely stop by if you still can get a ticket. If you can't, or if you don't feel like traveling, register for the online component. Same keynotes, we're live streaming them. Obviously, the coffee is on you at that point, but no travel required. It's going to be fun. We've got some, I think, fun announcements coming your way, definitely with a focus on security.
Excellent. So some fun announcements, a focus on security. Do you have any, who are some people we can expect to be hearing from?
I'm trying to figure out how to put this together in a way that we don't spoil the goodness.
No spoilers, no spoilers.
Definitely no spoilers. Our CEO, Dave McJanet, will be speaking in Munich. We've got Armon speaking, of course. We've got different sessions aimed at technical decision makers, but also hands-on workshops. And I think, personally, I'm most excited about those. Our education engineers have spent the past few weeks and months even crafting very good tutorials that explain hard concepts in a respectful amount of time, helping you get up to speed with a couple of features in hopefully an easy way. Should be fun.
Excellent. Super looking forward to it. I have had the pleasure and the honor of being a part of some HashiCorp workshops, both as an attendee, a humble attendee, as well as a facilitator over the years. They are really, honestly, extremely high quality. So if you're looking to learn more about anything in that universe, period, definitely sign up. As you said, tickets are sold out, but the online registration is still free. The coffee's on you. Super. So definitely do check that out. Speaking of events, we here at Scaleway also occasionally are involved in the world of events. So if you are interested in learning a little bit more about where we're going to be, what we're going to be doing, so on and so forth, you can check out scaleway.com/en/events, and we've got the up on the screen now. So you can see some stuff that's going on. We do some in-person events. We've got one coming up in Lille, which is a city sort of in the north of France near the Belgian border, where we're going to have Vianney Foucault, who is the platform staff engineer at Content Square, is going to come and talk about basically why platform engineering is hard and where do you hide the complexity, right? Which is the thing. Everybody talks about platforms. Everybody wants a platform, but you got to hide the complexity. How do you do that, right? And we also have Loïc Poiseau, the CEO of Customs Bridge, who's going to talk about something. I should have prepared that ahead of time. Sorry, Loïc. But whatever it is, it's going to be good. Yes, accept those cookies. Accept them. Accept them into your heart. We also have the upcoming episode of The Jam here in Paris. If you've never been to The Jam, I actually MC that. And it is a monthly event designed for sort of engineers, managers. It's the intersection of business and technology. We're going to have Adam Surak, who's the head of platform at Be Real. If you have a teenager in your home, you probably have heard of Be Real. He's going to come and talk about basically kind of how that works and how that goes. It's the first time they've ever done a talk ever. So
Exciting.
That's cool.
it's going to be very, very cool. We've also got Dustin Coates, who's the principal product manager at Algolia. Algolia Search as a Service, been around for a long time, who is going to be talking about basically AI and large language models and how to do natural language processing and stuff like this, which is going to be super, super cool. And finally, we also have the 4th edition of Cube Talks. This time we're going to be on the road. We're going to be in Lille again. So if you're going to be in Lille and you happen to speak French, this is our totally 100% based, totally 100% Kubernetes based meetup. So definitely come check that out. And finally, I would just like to say that if you want to meet us in person, Eli, Diego, myself, we are all going to be in Amsterdam towards the end of the month.
Mm-hmm.
Kerim, are you going to be in Amsterdam towards the end of the month?
I will be in Amsterdam for you.
Excellent. So we're all going to be at DevOps Days Amsterdam towards the end of the month. If you've never been to a DevOps Days before, check it out. Come to the one in Amsterdam. We're all going to be there, right?
Amsterdam is a beautiful DevOps Days.
My understanding is that the tickets are actually nearly sold out. Like, we're talking double digits that are left. So if you're on the fence, don't wait. Go buy it now. It's going to be a lot of fun. And I think that's it for us. Oh, I also want to shout out. We have a really cool newsletter if you're into Kubernetes. It's called Behind the Helm. Eli, what's in the newsletter?
Roundups of community and technical news from Kubernetes and broader cloud native world. So the last one sort of mentioned things like Kube Huddle that happened in Toronto last month, things that are in the patch notes for the latest releases, any cool podcasts that have recently started or particular episodes that have come out, that sort of thing. I also write a cryptic crossword for each one with Kubernetes and cloud native themed words, but cryptic clues like you get in British newspapers like the Times or the Telegraph, but without all the UK cultural baggage. They're all like wordplay, no needing to know who the Prime Minister was in 1973 or anything like that. And that's the real reason to sign up for the newsletter, is you get my cryptic crosswords. They do come out later in the next month on our Dev2 account. So you don't actually, if you want to go check that out before committing to signing up, you can go do that too and see some examples.
Sure.
Past,
All right.
past newsletters.
Well, I guess, and shout out the Right Honorable Sir Edward Keith.
Exactly.
Was the PM in 1973.
Right.
But you didn't need to know that
No.
to do the Kubernetes newsletter. One of the things we really like to get feedback on the newsletter is if you thought it was too hard, too easy, calibrating that,
I'm
right?
flying pretty blind here. The last one I wrote while I was had a massive fever and an ear infection. So if that one's really weird, that's on me. But
why is every single one of these a Cthulhu reference? That's weird.
Yeah, very strange. No particular reason why.
Exactly. All right. Well, listen, this has been a lot of fun. Thank you so much, Kerim, for coming on stream with us. Really appreciate you coming through, taking the time to share your knowledge, to share your expertise, to deal with our ridiculous questions. As always, it's a boatload of fun. Thank you, Eli, for everything. Honestly, the insightful commentary, the lovely glasses, and of course, thank you, Diego, behind the scenes. Couldn't put any of these sessions together without you. Thank you, everybody who sends in the questions, the comments. Thank you, Rob, for reminding me about the wig. Yes, I will bring it out again. And thank you to you for watching the show. Remember, like, subscribe, tell your friends, come out to the events. We'll see you in Amsterdam. Until then, everybody, stay safe out there. Bye, everybody.
Bye.